too high. There we go. I am fantasy author Katie Brisky,
And I am editor Jen R. Albert.
and welcome back to our virtual home. We hope you enjoyed our wonderful new theme music, courtesy of Alex White. Fun fact, they recorded that in one take, the 50th time. In addition to being an awesome composer, Alex is also an incredible writer of many books, including the Salvagers series, and perhaps they shall yet grace our virtual stage.
Is that foreshadowing? Welcome to anyone joining us for the first time, and welcome back to those of you who have visited virtual Ephemera before. For those who are new, Ephemera is an award-nominated reading series chaired by Katie Brisky and myself. Before COVID, we held events at Glad Day Bookshop. While we await our triumphant return to Glad Day, we continue to huddle around the glow of diverse science fiction and fantasy.
And we would like to begin tonight by acknowledging that the land on which Jen and I live and work is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. This land is covered under Treaty 13 and is part of the Dish with One Spoon. And I tried to draw a metaphor between the lengthening nights here in the Northern Hemisphere and the increasing darkness that seems to be gathering across the world. And then I realized the 7 a.m. darkness outside my window is part of the cycle of things. It's the way that the Earth moves through the cosmos. But there's nothing natural about the injustices that we see around us. That's a thing to think about with metaphor and words, I think. Sometimes we use them as lights to expose wrongs and injuries, but they can equally be used to obscure the truth. For example, a suspicious fire at a lobster pound being used by Mi'kmaq fishers. Of course, there's nothing suspicious about it. This was the same lobster pound attacked by hundreds of settlers days earlier. To call it suspicious not only elides the truth, it's an insult and it's violence. Or consider the argument posed by non-Indigenous commercial fishers that the Waubgeshig fishery threatens lobster stocks, which is factually untrue. This isn't about lobster conservation. It's about white supremacy and racist belligerence towards the Mi'kmaq's treaty-protected rights to fish. It's about settlers' refusal to accept that it is the right of Indigenous peoples to determine for themselves what constitutes a moderate livelihood, not the federal government's right. And this isn't just about lobster. From coast to coast to coast, systemic racism has undermined and attacked Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. We're here tonight because we love words. We're here because we believe in their power to make better worlds. But there are harmful words too. And settlers, I'm talking to especially right now, they're not always enough. Speak up, yes, then act out. We'll post a resource document outlining ways to support the Waubgeshig First Nation. But settlers, I also encourage you to learn about the treaties that may be in place in your own locales and examine how you live by them. Winter is part of a cycle. Colonial violence and white supremacy shouldn't be. Thank you. We also have some spooktacular treats lined up for you. It will be a scream. I'm sure it will raise your spirits. Hold on, I'm not done. It'll be fantastic.
Thank you very much, Tamik. I am honored to be here this evening. And thank you, of course, Jennifer and KT, for inviting me to be a part of Ephemera. It's a huge honor. I greatly support and love the spirit of the series, and it's just really cool to be a part of it. And I just want to thank you, KT, for that important opening monologue. It is important to acknowledge our Mi'kmaq relatives out east who are upholding their rights and being caretakers of the land and the waters. And I'm really glad to have that acknowledged as we open up tonight. So I'll introduce myself briefly in Shnabemwen, Bojo, Waubgeshig Rice, Makwat Nodem, Wasaksing Tonchba, Minonakshik. Hi, good evening. I am Waubgeshig Rice. You can also call me Wab for short. I'm a member of the Bear Clan of the Nishnabek of Wasaksing. That's on Georgian Bay near Parry Sound, Ontario. And tonight I'll read you a passage from my most recent novel, Moon of the Crested Snow. And I was pretty delighted to see the rough theme for this evening's program be light. And, you know, when I was thinking it over, I considered a passage much later in the novel that touches on light both in reality and in the dream world, and sort of the influence of that, and how it guides the protagonist through making some important decisions, and really impacts the unfolding of the rest of the book. So just very brief synopsis. Moon of the Crested Snow is a book about the end of the world through the perspective of Northern Ontario First Nation. Widespread blackout occurs. Community descends into a bit of panic and a bit of chaos, and that is compounded by the arrival of settlers from a city to the south. So this passage I'm going to read you later on, we visit Evan Whitesky, who's the protagonist, and he is deeply disturbed and contemplating what to do about the antagonist in the story, who's Justin Scott. He's one of the visitors who come from the city in the south. So this actually comes up against the climax of the story, but what I read you, I don't think will give anything away. I'll just give you something to think. And this portion is also inspired by Anishinaabe perspectives on the dream world and how influential and important that is in guiding us through our day-to-day lives. So this is chapter 27 of Moon of the Crested Snow. Evan struck the red match head against the gritty side of the box. A tiny orange flame crackled to life, giving off a small puff of gray smoke. The sulfur lingered for a moment, stinging his nostrils. Pinching the match between his calloused, dirt-stained thumb and forefinger, he turned the match to let the flame crawl along the small wooden stick. It began as an orange teardrop and stretched as it crawled along the stick. As it elongated, the flame peaked at either end, like a smile. The cold air above it shimmered from the small pocket of heat. The fire crawled away from the match head, leaving curved, charred remains that almost looked like a burned tadpole. The flame mesmerized Evan, and he didn't realize he was under its spell until he felt it burn his fingers. He shook the flame out and threw the match on the ground before lighting another. He lit the second one and, after letting it burn for a second, placed it in an opening in the meticulously piled wood in front of him. The burning spruce and pine smelled familiar and comforting. As the orange flames emerged from the heart of the pile, a gray plume rippled upwards through the opening in the green canvas tarp above him, blending with the overcast sky that peeked through. Evan sunk back to sitting on the old brown sleeping bag and savored the peace as the fire crackled to life in front of him. The ground around him was clear of snow. He had shoveled out as much as he could on his last trip here, and the fire he'd lit during that visit had warmed the interior enough to melt away the remains. This was Evan's secret project, a shelter in the bush that he had begun the day after the food brawl, a backup in case he and his family needed refuge from whatever turmoil might eventually consume his community. He had begun by chopping the long, straight, narrow spruce trees that would be the pillars and stripping their bark. A few days later, he had sledded out the 3 thick canvases, one at a time. Each trip took a full morning. He came back a few days after that to dig out a fire pit and drape the tarps over the teepee frame. Here he was, weeks later, beginning to outfit this safe haven. A pile of neatly folded wool blankets lay on the ground on the far side of the structure. 2 boxes of assorted canned goods were stacked on the right. He planned to wrap the boxes with some of the blankets to insulate them from the freezing temperatures that would last another couple of months. He'd have to rebuild the structure in the spring to let the poles cure properly, but for now, this experiment seemed to be working. Evan looked over the dancing flames at the load he had just dragged over the snow. He slid his right hand into the pocket of his parka and pulled out a small purple drawstring cloth bag that had once held a stubby, heavy bottle of whiskey. Its contents rattled as he bounced the satchel lightly in his cracked palm. The bag held a simple can opener and 10 small boxes of matches, an emergency supply to open the food and start a fire, should he and his family have to escape to this tent in the bush. He surveyed the ground around him for a place to bury the bag. He felt about under the decomposing leaves that had been crushed into the yellow grass by the snow. The vegetation felt damp, and below the ground was frozen. He slammed the heel of his boot into the earth, and a shock reverberated through his foot. The ground was still too frozen to dig. But the fire had warmed the inside of the tent. Evan stood up to take off his heavy parka. The teepee stood almost 3 times his height, and he easily stepped around the fire to throw the bag over top the boxes and blankets. As he leaned over to pick up one of the blankets, a drop of sweat fell from his long black bangs. He wiped the perspiration from his brow with the tattered sleeve of his black hoodie. How long was I sitting in front of the fire? He thought. He pulled the top blanket off the pile and shook it open. It reeked of mustiness, like the corner of the basement from which he'd grabbed it. It was one of a few old blankets put aside for emergency situations. He couldn't remember when he had stashed this one away, but it clearly hadn't been used in a very long time. Evan shook it out one more time and let it fall gently on the ground. He turned back to the pile and picked up an orange blanket the same size and make as the first. He flapped it open, making the flames dance and grow. He laid it over the gray one and sat down on the insulated ground. Sitting cross-legged, he stared into the fire, then leaned on one elbow so he could stretch out his legs. His people didn't make teepees. They weren't characteristic of the Anishinaabe. But he learned how to build one from a how-to guide in a hunting magazine of all places. He and Isaiah experimented with different sizes on random excursions into the bush over the years. Right now, it was the easiest, most reliable thing he could build in the middle of the winter in a power crisis. The warmth relaxed him, and the stillness inside the teepee soothed him. He felt the stiffness in his upper back ease. The peaceful winter day outside left the tarps undisturbed on the poles. Evan rested his head on the inside of his arm, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. A blizzard howled as he opened the high garage door, the whiteout obscuring his line of sight. He looked up to see a crimson sun pulsing through the winter storm, washing the snow around him in a bright red glow like the flashing lights of an ambulance. It seemed to flash in sync with the beat of his heart, which sped up as he stepped into the building to escape the storm. He pulled back the hood of his parka and his eyes struggled to adjust to the darkness. The pulsating flares from the sun outside did nothing to illuminate the interior of the morgue. He couldn't make out the neatly arranged lines of bodies. His hands trembled under his thick snowmobile mitts. He panicked and bit on the end of the right mitt to pull his hand out and thrust it into his pocket to grab his flashlight. His hand shook as he cradled the light close to his chest and struggled to find the switch. The red light from the outside intensified and his breath grew shorter. His chest was tight and he struggled for air. To his relief, he located the button and the bluish light shot upward and back down to the floor as he got his panicked hands under control. All that remained were the old tattered blankets that had wrapped the bodies. It looked like they had decomposed into nothing. His heartbeat echoed loudly in his ears. A fierce trembling overcame his whole body and his pupils dilated. A deep guttural growl boomed behind him and drowned out the howl of the wind. Whatever stood in the snow just outside the garage door wheezed as it drew in a breath and let out a harsh, threatening snarl at a pitch just higher than a bear's. Evan stiffened, momentarily paralyzed, before he summoned the courage to turn and face it. A feral odor, like a rotting heap of moose innards, wafted briskly into the garage. A tall, gaunt silhouette stood in the doorway, outlined by the scarlet blizzard behind it. The smell made him gag. The creature hunched forward. The hair on its broad shoulders and long arms blurred the lines of its figure. Its legs appeared disfigured almost backwards, but its large round head scared him the most. It breathed out another savage rumble. Evan slowly raised the flashlight, illuminating the figure's pale, heavy, emaciated torso under sparse brown body hair. He brought the beam up to its face. It was oddly familiar. Scott. His cheeks and lips were pulled tight against his skull. He breathed heavily through his mouth, with long incisors jutting upward and downward from rows of brown teeth. His eyes were blacked out. If it weren't for the large, bald scalp and the long, pointy nose, this monster would have been largely unrecognizable. The beast Scott had become lunged forward. Miigwech, thank you very much. That's Moon of the Crested Snow.
Thank you so much, Bob. That was wonderful. I was lucky enough to get to do a little bit of work on that book, like in my first year at ECW, so it's just wonderful to see how well it is done. I realize I was muted for your bio, so I'm going to read Bob's bio again so everybody knows all of the great stuff he does. Bob Waubgeshig Rice is an author and journalist from Wasauksing First Nation on Georgian Bay. He has written 3 fiction titles, and his short stories and essays have been published in numerous anthologies. His most recent novel, which he just read from, Moon of the Crusted Snow, was published in 2018 and became a national bestseller. He graduated from Ryerson University's journalism program in 2002 and spent the bulk of his journalism career at CBC, most recently as host of Up North, the afternoon radio program for Northern Ontario. He lives in Sudbury, Ontario with his wife and 2 sons.
Now, alas, my friends, it seems that we have been trapped within a haunted house. A grim chill wraps its icy fingers around our bones. One guttering candle casts its tremulous light against the darkness.
And then we spy a door with a combination lock on the wall.
A mysterious cipher on the wall! What does the
A combination lock on the door. The mysterious cipher is on the wall. It says Dracula was published in what? A 4-digit number, perhaps?
If only we had a 4-digit number to put in that combination lock. Well, if you think you might know what it is, you can put your answer in the chat or reply to our tweet on Twitter, which doesn't exist yet. I will put it up after I welcome tonight's performer. All right, my friends, it is my very great pleasure to introduce Charlie C. Petch. Charlie C. Petch is an award-winning playwright, spoken word artist, haiku deathmaster, host, and musical saw player. They have an upcoming poetry book with Brick Books in fall 2021, a libretto, Medusa's Children, forthcoming with Opera Q, and their multimedia play, Daughter of Geppetto, is also forthcoming with Wind in the Leaves. Petch was the 2017 Poet of Honor for Spoken Word Canada, winner of the Golden Beret Lifetime Achievement in Spoken Word with the League of Canadian Poets, is a youth mentor with TDSB Creates, and is the founder of Hot Damn, It's a Queer Slam. You can find them at www.charliecpetch.com and on Twitter as @sawpoet.
Thank you so much. That was a lovely reading too. It's a beautiful book. And thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of your show. You can hear me, yes? All good? Very good. Okay, thank you. So I'm gonna do 3 short pieces tonight. And yeah, it's sort of, since it's speculative fiction, I was thinking that maybe too much Star Wars is not enough. So there's going to be a lot of Star Wars going on. Okay. Hello. Okay. This is called Dear C-3PO. I always thought that you were gay. I imagined that there was a little tiny glorious hole in R2-D2, and that when you made love, he made those happy robot sounds. Maybe he would turn his head all the way around to try and see you, try and read joy in your manufactured face. I always thought you a top, that R2-D2 whispered love songs that didn't sound pre-programmed or desperate or othering. C-3PO, with your golden exterior made up of melted down wedding rings, tossed into vats at flight schools, the sheddings of those ready to die. These galaxy warriors who laughed at what made you feminine, which sounds like hesitation, which sounds like we are afraid to feel. How you must have keened every time your lover went to war, became a plug in another machine, as unprotected as a jet wing. Your golden face never told us that behind the joke was a man in love with a soldier. I felt your tears, my sweet, though your golden face betrayed nothing. Thank you. Okay, this next one, thank you. Oh, there we go. This next one is a love poem for climate change. Done to the tune of Sleepwalk. Oh, sorry, by Santo and Johnny, Sleepwalk. There we go. How about I'll try that again? 1 second, thank you. That was just the warm up. Thank you. I am so full of words for you. I always have been. Sometimes when you were asleep, I'm so full of words for you. Sometimes when you were asleep, I would whisper, I love you, as lightly as pollen. I could never say it when you were awake. And now I love you. After the moon has fallen into the ocean and the bees have burned onto the sun, I hope you can sometimes hear me saying, I love you in your dreams. Perhaps it is the voice of a willow. I love you. Do you remember trees? I love you. There we go. That was just something to cheer everybody up. There we go. And I want to say, like, I love spec fiction. It is one of my favorite things to study and immerse myself in. And much like music and poetry, it is a real escape. And I just really enjoy being in this little world together with you guys here. Thanks for coming over. Yeah, this is my place. So the last one I'm gonna perform, I'm gonna try and do some nice dance moves. It's gonna be like watching your trans dad dance in his lovely living room for all to see. Okay, here we go. So this is a tune from my old band called the Silverhearts, and it's called A Place to Sleep. And this is for my favorite Star Wars character. Okay, so excited about it. Okay. I might just take these off so I can dance properly. Okay. Okay, here we go. This next one's for you, Chewbacca. You are one of my favorites of all of the Wookiees. Since I saw you in my first movie, which is actually the fourth movie, you have ruined me for all of humanity. Chewie, there's never enough chest hair to satisfy me, never enough back hair to warm the cockles of my star-warring heart. The smell of sweat and hair is never husky, musky enough for me to fully fill my little tusk. But I try. Just back from the gym, bring that hairy ass in. The love cries of my partners have never equaled the parallel universe of what comes out of your small-toothed mouth. Why are you not more saber-toothed? Like saber-toothed platitudes of love from you would be like sweet baths of sound, glorious guttural bubblings of ghastly sex. Would you make me wear a mohair onesie so that you could accept me as your own? Would you have me stop scaping my landscape so that there would be somewhere soft for you to land? Chewbacca, would you only chew my baka? If the hair was long enough to get tangled up in yours, I want to twist and turn and grind you until we become dreadlocks. I want my skin to be patterned in the scraped lines of the lineage you left to be with me, for our kitchen to smell of victory sage and the rubbed salt of galaxy seas. We could live our lives as naked apes. Only I'd probably wear a bra or a binder or like a bro, because it feels kind of uncomfortable not to have one on. Maybe we could both wear bros or binders and dance to the space music created for us by the human John Williams. Chewbacca, I didn't think that my love for you could outlast my crush on Han Solo, but when I am with my Han Solo, it is your Wookiee cry that blushes my neck. Your feet that must smell of freedom I want resting on the backs of my calves. It is you, Wookiee man, your ammo belt crashed to the floor, your tendrils caught in my overflossed teeth that pull out my belief that the language we speak. You never include the oppressive civilization of English. Wookiee, I cry out. In hopes that you might someday cruise your Millennium Falcon my way. Thank you so much for having me. This is really, really fun. I'm all sweaty now in my living room. Okay, thank you.
Oh, such moves. Thank you, Charlie. That was amazing. The chat's gone wild. Oh, I think Katie might be muted.
I am, but it's your turn to speak.
Oh, I know. Just making sure. So, back to the haunted house we are all stuck in. We enter 1897, as the chat wisely has discovered.
And the YouTube,
the lock,
and the Twitter as well.
and
Twitter also, yes.
And Twitter too. Thank you, Twitter. And the lock grudgingly creaks open. Beyond the door, we find a narrow, twisting staircase. Brush away the cobwebs and we descend. Was that a soft chuckle we heard?
At the bottom of the stairs, we find a series of portraits, somber and grim. Thick dust coats their faces, but strangely, they're all composers. Suddenly, an eerie organ tune echoes through the night. It echoes so good you can't even hear it. It goes like this. Doodaloo, doodaloo, doo. Doodaloo, doodaloo, doo, doo. But which Baroque composer wrote that tune? To which portrait should we go?
Which portrait?
Well, I guess we'll
The
find
answer?
out. You should answer
something
in the
that you
chat
should
or
put?
on the Twitter.
In the chat or on the Twitter. And in the meantime, you can help us welcome our next reader. Khashayar Mohammadi is a queer Iranian-born, Toronto-based poet, writer, translator, and photographer. He is the author of poetry chapbooks Mo's Skin by Zed Press in 2008, Dear Kestrel by Knife Fort Book in 2019, and Solitude is an acrobatic act by Above Ground Press 2020. His debut poetry collection, Me, You, Then Snow, is forthcoming with Gordon Hill Press. Kramer?
Hello, everyone. Hello to everyone who tuned in. I have never had this much fun in a poetry reading. This is not a poetry reading, in a reading series ever. It was so much fun. And thanks to everyone who tuned in, thanks to Katie and Jen, and to everyone I'm reading with tonight. And I wanted to say that I wanted to encourage, I've seen a lot of recent immigrants, which I consider myself, to kind of put themselves out of touch with national problems like Indigenous rights. And I encourage you all, like, you do not have to be born in Canada to be profiting from the land. So I encourage each and every one of you, each and every single person on this land, to look up how to help your Indigenous communities. So I'm going to get into my reading, which is, I'm going to read 3 poems, and I'm going to give a little background. So I've chosen poems for this that do not need a lot of background, but all 3 poems are from the same manuscript, Mard Oqyanus Pema in Farsi, which I have translated as The Ocean Dweller, which is a speculative poetry manuscript by the brilliant writer Saeed Tabanai. I hope he sees this. I want to congratulate him on this wonderful, beautiful, magnificent poetry manuscript that we spent the beginning of this summer translating from Farsi with his supervision. And I'm going to read 3 of my favorite poems. It starts, and since it was adapted from a radio play, it has some stage directions that I have to read. So the first one is called The Open Tome, and each poem, without me realizing it, has to do with the theme of light, night, and darkness, which is very interesting. The Open Tome. My room, no, my prison. Love is my prison. Stage direction. In the room, a female voice is heard from the television whispering, "Didn't you seek this all your life?" And then continues with certainty, "Now these walls are real." The female voice stops, so does the sad background music. We are now in the Ocean Dweller's cabin. Normal sounds of the cabin are heard, beakers clinking, plexiglass implements moving around, the sound of steam, the picking up and putting down of a book. The Ocean Dweller narrates the story of a father who has interwoven the reality of war with fiction. This is the poem again. They were from a planet far, far away, a planet unknown to us. They were a man and a woman. They came as saviors of light. The man did not have wings, the woman did. The woman had carried the man to this planet to scribe inside the open tome. The open tome was our destiny, the fate of light battling darkness. Stage direction now. The cacophony of war, human voices screaming, drowning in explosions. The story continues. War had dried up all ink on the pages. Every day the scripture grew pale. The man had come to once again overwrite the chronicles of light so light can remain, since only it was in light that humanity was possible. And they were the only ones who knew. The man wrote upon the opened pages, and the woman looked upon the man from another planet, holding two brilliant blue flowers by a window without walls. Love was a bridge between dark voids in space. Invisible rings traversed and connected. The man only thought of her, the woman only looked at him. And what is it that gnaws at your heart so? Gnaws at your bitter roots and the deadly moment that follows. The moment of separating hands, eyes, and hearts. Following a deadly hesitation. The man lingered and got lost in time. Time stopped for the woman, but it kept on going for the man. War was rekindled. The man must pass oceans of time to arrive at the barnacled cliff. Early morning, when it's time to sleep, I say to myself, I hope I dream a pleasant dream. But I'm haunted by nightmares. Neither you nor your likeness ever visits my dreams. Strange faces, strange places. I am estranged from my own dreamscapes. I often feel I've mistaken myself for someone else. Nothing is familiar, even the shape of my fingers. Doubt has seeped into my being. Nothing is separate from anything. Borders have blurred into the all-encompassing. Wherever I am can be anywhere. My memories have become encrypted, and there's no one left to remind me of my words, mannerisms, habits, or even my favorite food. I think I once heard from a radio station that you have tuned in to the spiritual capital of Iran. Here, everything is constantly changing. Streets, people, words, memories, tastes, smells, rooms, dreams, days, loves, shops, vices, virtues, friendships, enmities, poems, nightmares, realities. So I think one thing that I forgot to mention was that book was originally written by Saeed Tabanai, who's an Iranian-born writer and translator. He is a wonderful poet. He currently lives and works in Iran, and that I just wanted to make sure to have mentioned that. The next is my absolute favorite poem from the whole book, and it's called Audiographs. Sorry, I just have to, just one moment. I'm just recovering from a cold, so really sorry. Audiographs. I'm up all night thinking of long pathways. Interior room, night, man and woman sitting. The night had begun. Pine trees crowned with the bird's sorrow. We sat beside another one last time. Close your eyes. And together we disappeared. Stage direction. They closed their eyes and both disappeared, traveling in time. Poem. All who travel to the White Swans seek the rekindling of memories. At the White Swans, nothing changes. There's a wagon waiting, neither going nor coming. Everything frozen in perpetual stasis. No one understands the truth of this place, since no one has ever come back from the White Swans. Stage direction. In the ocean cruiser, we travel through the labyrinthine corridors to get to the ocean dweller. We hear his footsteps, his long robes draped over the damp, mossy interior of the ocean cruiser. He opens the tall, narrow door to the white poplar hall. From the middle of the silver poplar leaves and along the crystal hall filled with water fountains, the sweet smell of eucalyptus. The ocean dweller is writing the manifesto of the seasons. Wolves chase deer, and the deer have little time to chew the willow saplings, and everything is in a perpetual cycle that will undoubtedly one day stop. Like multicolored tropical birds expatriated into glamorous ponds, and this dynamic cycle of water and air is eternal. In the past, there was no night, only snow melting. Stage direction. Her voice. Poem. Take my hand. Somewhere in my chest hurts more than ever sometimes. back in the cabin, the man behind the room writing. Poem. Every time he witnessed the tree shed its larger leaves, a part of him died. Every time cold rain poured, it was as if a youngster had died without reason. I now know that we must live, we must not relent. He gets up, stands behind the window. While staring out the window, he says, spring rain has no earthly source. Like spring butterflies, like spring birds, like the gentle scent of your hair in spring air. But the city was a very old city, and we were young, and nothing was simple there, not even poverty, nor sudden money, nor the moonlight, nor right, nor wrong, nor breathing of someone who lay beside you in the moonlight. Just as a caveat, that's a quote from an Ernest Hemingway book. Continuing the poem. A sad melody fills the space. As the music fades, we hear the woman reciting a poem reluctantly, as if only to remember. What do the white jasmine flowers hand to the breeze, other than the bitter scent of oblivion? Stage direction. He begins writing again. He recounts the meeting of the scientist and the observer before journeying to open horizons. Poem. Solitude was a one-eyed man with 2 roses crowning his head. As a child, he was abandoned in a suburban basement. He was raised by a fox. Inscribed audiographs on surrounding walls, songs and hymns, sound of rain, every single I love you uttered. He knew every word. He handed me the audiographic map of the city and said, people will seek you. They will talk and then leave. Allow music to fill in their absence. Songs must be sought. The most beautiful are the most sorrowful. I asked, is solitude endless? He said, solitude and death aren't antonyms. We are a single stem with 2 flowers. He gave me a rose crowning his head. Solitude ended. Thank you very much. Hope you all have a good night.
Thank you so much.
That was incredible. Thank you so much. What gorgeously wrought language. Love it. Well, we have had our responses in on Twitter and the chat, and we've correctly identified our mysterious composer as none other than J.S. Bach. So let's see what's going on with these portraits. We press lightly upon the austere portrait of J.S. Bach, and it swings outwards. In the space behind, a narrow passageway trails into darkness.
We descend again. The deeper we go, the more the passage narrows, as though we're caught in the throat of a great beast. Something flutters in the distance, like bat's wings.
We enter into a chamber strewn with coffins. A paper lies on the floor. Take as many steps as you have bones. Not ominous at all.
How many bones do we adult humans have? How many steps should we take? Answer in the chat or on Twitter.
And while we contemplate that, it is my very great pleasure once again to welcome our final reader tonight, Sarah Pinsker. Sarah Pinsker is the author of the Nebula Award-winning novel, A Song for a New Day, and the Philip K. Dick Award-winning collection, Sooner or Later, Everything Falls into the Sea. Her second novel, We Are Satellites, will be published by Berkeley in 2021. She is also a singer-songwriter with 3 albums on various independent labels. She lives in Baltimore with her wife and dog. Find her online at sarahpinsker.com and on Twitter at Sarah Pinsker. Welcome.
Hi there. So when I heard that the theme was going to be light, for some reason that took me to music, as most things do, and I had thought of this story that it's a couple of years old now. And it's called I frequently hear music in the very heart of noise, and it's a story. It's a love letter to cities, and it's a love letter to New York, and it's a love letter to music, and it's a love letter to art, and it's sort of impressionistic. And I'm not going to read you the whole thing. I'm just going to read some selections from it that kind of make sense. together. I've sometimes read this story by like throwing all the parts in the air and reading random ones. So you can read it in order online, but I'm just going to read you some of it tonight. And so it starts with a quote from a song by Bess Morris from For One Night Only, 1924. This green gold city will embrace you, take you out of time and erase you. And for one brief moment, you will let her. For one night only, you'll be hers. And I'm going to skip down to the Plaza Hotel, green and gold. Sometime in the early 20s, a sober Scott Fitzgerald is said to have danced fully clothed through the Pulitzer Fountain at the Plaza Hotel. Another version of the story says it was Scott and Zelda both drunk. A 1922 show called the Greenwich Village Follies included a painted curtain depicting everyone who was anyone in the New York scene of the time, Zelda rising from a fountain at the center of the crowd. Green and gold, gold and green, everywhere in Gatsby a few years later, Daisy the Golden Girl, Gatsby's gold tie, old money versus new, the green light of the orgastic future. According to Plum's The Streets Where They Lived, Fitzgerald, seeing the city as it was, all blazing with green and gold lights, and the taxis and limousines streaming up and down Fifth Avenue, jumped in the Pulitzer Fountain just out of sheer joy. Hilbert's Hotel. We step away from New York for a moment to demonstrate a particularly New York thought experiment. In 1924, German mathematician David Hilbert gave a lecture hypothesizing that a fully occupied hotel with an infinite number of rooms might still accommodate additional guests. If you move the person in room 1 to room 2, and the person in room 2 to room 4, and every subsequent guest from room N to room 2N, you empty all the odd-numbered rooms, making room for an infinite number of new guests. Not exactly Hilbert's Hotel. Scott Fitzgerald said of New York in 1919 that it had all the iridescence of the beginning of the world. If you move the hotel at number 1 to number 2, and the hotel at number 2 to number 4, and every subsequent hotel from its plot as in a variation on the problem above, the result is a lot of wobbly, unpinned hotels. Logic will only take you so far. Instead, create a hotel in between the others, right where people expect a hotel. Take all the time you need and all the space. It's New York, you'll fill the rooms. Give it all the things that make a hotel special. Make it very old or very new. Give it secret passages and long corridors and dead ends. It must have a ballroom and a welcoming lobby and a bar, preferably a dim one, preferably with a secret trapdoor, and a restaurant that's just out of style, and a plaque or photograph that proves so-and-so dined here. Fill it with art, some of which may appear to move from time to time, and wasn't the figure in that portrait facing the other way? It may have a cat sometimes, and a further idiosyncrasy or two about it, lobby acoustics that let someone on one end hear the conversation on the other, a mysterious button on the wall, a dead-end corridor, a ghost, a faulty elevator. The Hotel Ekphrastic. Composer Bess Morris had not ridden in an elevator prior to moving into the 12th floor suite at the Ekphrastic, her previous apartments having been walk-ups. The Ekphrastic's northeast elevator had a habit of stopping between floors. Most of the residents took pains to avoid that elevator, but she often waited for it specifically. All these stories and we're nowhere, she remarked one night to the other people in the stuck elevator, her companion Judy Seelig and the painter Charles Dumas. Dumas' painting We Are Nowhere, destroyed in a gallery fire 3 years later, was dedicated to Bess Morris, and Seelig maintained that brief moment stuck in the elevator inspired 2 great works. Seelig said later, "We were headed out to see the Marx Brothers in I'll Say She Is at the Casino Theater. Since I was between plays myself and eager to see what everyone else had been talking about, Bess and Charles and I were halfway down to the lobby when the elevator stuck between floors, and Bess changed her mind about going out. He and I went on without her. That was the night she came up with For One Night Only." The Hotel Shelton. Georgia O'Keeffe painted blue and green music in her first years in New York City. She had the idea that music could be translated into something for the eye, but she caught the city's hidden face as well. The angles and planes, the cacophony and the pockets of quiet, trees and buildings and shards of sky. They're in there if you look, even if she preferred Toscanini to jazz. O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz married in 1924 and moved to Suite 3003 on the Hotel Shelton's top floor. O'Keeffe had watched the skyscraper go up, the first in the neighborhood. It was cheaper than the first-class residential hotels, but still allowed them to live without the wasted time of a kitchen. They took their meals in the 16th floor cafeteria. They had 2 small, low-ceilinged rooms, but the living room, which O'Keeffe used as her studio, had windows facing north and east. I know it's unusual for an artist to want to work way up near the roof of a big hotel in the heart of a roaring city, but I think that's just what the artist of today needs for stimulus, she said in an interview once. And in another interview, I began talking about trying to paint New York. Of course, I was told it was an impossible idea. Even the men hadn't done too well with it. She sometimes painted the city from her elevated perspective, but most of her skyscrapers are painted from a ground level vantage. Look at the Shelton with Sunspots, New York, 1926, the upper floors swallowed by sun, or Radiator Building, Night, New York, 1927, its forms precise as flowers, light beckoning from 100 windows. New York night is warm, lived in, even without human figures. It embodies O'Keeffe's theory that one can't paint New York as it is, but rather as it's felt. Two square blocks expanded. West 43rd and 44th Streets between 5th and 7th Avenues, housed at various points in the 20th century, the Algonquin Hotel, the shabby Hanover House, the Royalton Hotel, the Iroquois, where James Dean lived because it was cheaper than the Algonquin, the Metropole, the Americana, the Coolidge, the Lamb's Club, the Hotel Claridge, the Frastic, the Astor, and the 44th Street Hotel, as well as the Belasco Theater and the Aeolian Hall, where Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue debuted. Expand another few blocks north and south, and you can bring in the offices of the New Yorker and the Smart Set, the Hotel Knickerbocker, the New Amsterdam, the Lyric, any number of Broadway theaters, and Irving Berlin's place on 46th Street, where he wrote Always, Blue Skies, and Put It on the Ritz. Duke Ellington's band played down the nights at the seedy Hollywood Club a few blocks up Broadway, and Bix Beiderbecke's Wolverines held court at the Cinderella Ballroom a few blocks down. When Hoagie Carmichael saw Bix play his cornet, he's reported to have said, just 4 notes, but he didn't blow them. He hit them like a mallet hits a chime. Bix lived in those same square blocks, room 605 of the 44th Street Hotel, for a year in 1930. The original Roseland Ballroom on the 2nd floor of 1658 Broadway was where New York heard Louis Armstrong for the first time in 1924, during his year-long stint with the Fletcher Henderson Orchestra. He started out nervous enough that his bandmate Howard Scott turned and told him, listen, just close your eyes and play what you feel in your body, in your heart, in your mind. Be yourself, that's all. Later, Scott recounted that they could hear him out in the street, and we were told that there were people passing by that stopped listening to him. By the next night, word had spread, and the place was so packed they had to turn people away. Ellington and his band went to hear Armstrong whenever they were able. Despite the proliferation of African-American bands, most downtown venues were otherwise all white. The Roseland made a small exception. Black musicians were welcome to watch their peers play if they stood in a specific area out of the white patron's view. Ellington wrote of hearing Armstrong play, the guys had never heard anything just like it. There weren't words coined for describing that kick. Howard Scott said that during that year, if you ran into a trumpet player with a bandage on his lip, it was likely because he'd split it trying to squeeze out Armstrong's high notes. Run up and down the timeline, up and down that handful of blocks, and you'll overlay George Burns and Gracie Allen, Jack Benny, who was dating Gracie's roommate, Lenny Bruce and Toscanini, Jimmy Durante, Carmen Miranda, Maya Angelou, Charlie Chaplin, Spencer Tracy, Bert Lahr, Eugene O'Neill, the Astairs, the Marx Brothers, Room Service, Send Up a Larger Room, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, Audrey Hepburn, Billy Wilder, Tallulah Bankhead, Bess Morris and Judy Seelig, James Dean, Ella Fitzgerald, Dorothy Parker, and H.L. Mencken and the whole Algonquin crowd, Thurber and Guthrie and Gershwin. You'll overlay all the actors treading the boards of the Broadway theaters and the jazz musicians on their ballroom bandstands. Lucky Luciano will set up operations at the Claridge. Mobsters will shoot down gambler Herman Rosenthal on the sidewalk in front of the Metropole and escape in a gray Packard, the first known use of a getaway car, leading to a sensational trial and the execution of 5 men, as Fitzgerald described in Gatsby. Expand outward in time and space, an infinite number of hotel rooms holding an infinite number of hungry musicians and actors and writers. If we establish an infinite number of hotel rooms, perhaps we can also posit an infinite number of theaters and ballrooms with an infinite number of guests all aching for something about to begin, enough to wake a city. If a city wanted, it could dream a hotel into existence, and that hotel could dream a ballroom, and with that ballroom, a composer at a piano, as if she had always been, and with that composer, a song, and with that song, a band to play her work, and with that band, an audience, if a city wanted. Let me stop there.
We were taking exactly 206 steps, last I heard. Yes, the chat said so, so let's give that a try. It is very hard to count. Ahead, a thin shaft of light spills across the passage. A window. Freedom. We break into a run, and... Ah! A vampire! Wait! Wait! Vampires can be defeated by the light. Everybody, turn your lights on in your house. Shine your flashlights if you have them. Everybody, help! Okay, and thus we escaped and lived happily ever after. Well done, team.
Well done, everyone.
So,
I can't see my script. Go nuts.
you, dear audience, are the light that makes this series shine, and our readers as well. Until next time, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Ephemera Series, and please subscribe to this YouTube page. We'd like to thank the Ontario Arts Council for their funding assistance and Gangway Theatre Co. for help with our performances.
We'd also like to thank our fabulous readers and artist, composer Alex White, our friends, families, loved ones, and you! Thank you for staying with us. See you on November 18th for Ephemera's 1-year anniversary special. That's right, it has been an entire year of Ephemera, so we will see you right here on YouTube.
Good night, everybody.
Are we up? Should I dance? I lost my thing.
Yes.